Welcome to the Clinical Athlete Journal Club number 16. My name is Quinn Hennick, and I'm a proud clinical athlete provider. And I'm joined by Kevin McNamara, who is a physical therapist, currently completing a residency at Johns Hopkins. And he's a longtime Clinical Athlete Forum member and the one responsible for bringing the Journal Club to life. So, Kevin, thanks for being on as always, man.
Yeah, of course, Quinn. Looking forward to tonight. So it should be good.
It should be a good one. And, also appreciate everybody tuning in during the crazy time that we're all dealing with. We're all touched by what's going on in the world right now. And, hopefully a lot of us, my clinic is closed. I know that Kevin's work has been changed, different settings, and yeah, his responsibilities have changed. And a lot of you guys have been affected, if not all of you. So we appreciate you tuning in to this thing. And, if you got nothing else to do, you might as well talk shop about some literature. So we appreciate it. So the impetus for these meetings, if you're not, and maybe this is your first one, but way back in the day, a smart guy named Benjamin Franklin started a weekly club that was called the Junto Club. And it was a mutual improvement club, but it was basically just a room of really smart people discussing topics and issues of the day, kind of like what we're doing now. But they had an important policy, and that policy was that all discussions would be conducted in the sincere spirit of inquiry after truth, without fondness of dispute or desire of victory. And that has what's become our Clinical Athlete Journal Club motto. These meetings are conducted in the sincere spirit of inquiry after truth, without fondness of dispute or desire of victory. Doesn't mean we can't have discussions, though, and it doesn't mean we can't disagree. All of those things are welcome. It just means that we're all kind of on the same team, just trying to be less wrong. So nobody wins a gold star if they're more right at the end of the meeting. We'll just keep that in mind. Tonight's Journal Club topic is strength and power training in rehab. And I have made a couple poll questions to get a feel for the room. And I just launched the first question, and it just asks, who are you? Clinician, student, clinician, coach, trainer, student, coach, trainer. And then, so take a few seconds to input your answer so we can get a feel for the room. And Christopher, thanks for volunteering to be the scribe. I really appreciate that. If you could shoot me whatever you get, I'm going to put my email here. And you can email me whatever you have, and that would be fantastic. So we got about a quarter of you are clinicians, and oh, no, more, sorry. 48%, I was looking at the absolute numbers. 48% are clinicians. About a third of you are student clinicians. And then we've got a little over 10% coach or trainer, and then about a little less than 10% student coach trainer, but that's a nice mix. If you wanted to see that, there we are. Okay, and then also, these two questions. Do you use what you would consider strength and power training for your clients? And do you use what you would consider strength and power training for yourself? Sorry for the commas, not really, probably bad grammar there. So it looks like the vast majority is, yes, I have used strength and power training. Almost all of you for both. So it seems like this paper was probably, right up your guys' alley. So there we have there. And then last one. Were you familiar with this article before you looked at it for this meeting? Kevin, had you read this one?
No, I had not prior to this. I had not.
It was, I think that because it came out last fall, and I remember saying, ooh, and kind of skimming through it, and then put it on my never-ending list that just keeps growing and growing, and it just gets bumped,
It got lost in one of the 10 million tabs I have open at any one time.
So almost 10% said they were familiar with the article. Okay, well, let's just dig in. So the paper that we're going to discuss today is titled Strength and Power Training in Rehabilitation: Underpinning Principles and Practical Strategies to Return Athletes to high performance. And the lead author is Luca Maestroni, and I think he is out of the UK as well. I know Paul Reed, Chris Bishop, and Anthony Turner, all three of those people are out of the UK, and they do fantastic work. And Luca is a physiotherapist, and the other three, Paul Reed works in the sports med setting, and then Chris Bishop and Anthony Turner are strength and conditioning coaches, but work really closely with physios out there. So this is a really strong research group. And this is not a study where they're gathering or running an experiment, gathering empirical evidence or having groups comparing interventions, anything like that. This is a kind of a review article, a commentary, getting together. It's not a systematic review, so they didn't go through a systematic process. They didn't do a meta-analysis of any data. It's nothing like that. It's a well-written piece by some experts in the field who have lots of expertise in this area, and this is kind of their synthesis on the topic of strength and power training in rehab. And so what they do, and it's a relatively short read, but what they do is they go through and they define strength, which I like their working definition on page 2, which was strength can be defined as the limit of the neuromuscular system to produce force. Nice and simple. And I'm probably going to talk about how defining strength is not easy to do, but that was their definition. It was actually maximal strength can be defined as the upper limit of the neuromuscular system to produce force. And then they go on to cite the importance of strength, throwing out evidence showing that increases in strength or, being strong improves performance, and then citing how deficits in strength after an injury can impede the return to play process or impede performance. And then they talk about different training techniques to improve strength, which can be seen in table 1. And I'm wondering, I don't even want to mess with that. I was going to say, I want to share my screen, but maybe I'll test that at a future date. And so that was kind of the beginning of the article. And then they do the same thing for rate of force development. And we're going to go through all this stuff in more depth, but rate of force development starting on page 5 as defined as the ability to produce force per unit of time. So if maximal strength is your ability to produce force, period, like what is your peak? It doesn't matter how long it takes you to get there. What is the peak of force that you can produce? Then rate of force development is how fast you get to that peak or how fast you get to a certain level of force within a given time frame. So it's force produced per unit of time. And then they go through the same thing with rate of force development as they did for strength. They cite the importance of RFD in sports and sports performance. They cite deficits of RFD in injury scenarios, and then they talk about different training techniques to improve rate of force development, which can be seen in table 2. They did the same thing for reactive strength, which is probably maybe not as intuitive and probably doesn't have as much research behind it, just as much work behind it, period, as strength, definitely, or force production, definitely, and then even rate of force. But reactive strength, starting on page 6, defined as the ability to change from an eccentric phase to a concentric phase. So it's kind of your ability to react and change the contraction type, use the different qualities in the stretch shortening cycle and the plyometric qualities of your tissues to be able to go through something like a repeated jump or a cut where you're having to decelerate into an eccentric phase, absorb all that load, and then concentrically plan out of it, something like that. So we consider those things reactive strength. And then they do the same thing. They cite the importance of reactive strength in sports. They cite deficits of reactive strength in injury scenarios, and they talk about different ways to train for reactive strength that you can see in table 3. And then the article goes into a little bit of return to play testing, return to sport testing, and that is section 4.4 on page 8. And it's not very long, which is maybe something that we talk about, in this big paper. The testing section is like a paragraph or just in general, because some of this stuff is hard to test for. It's a lot of the evidence that comes out on it is in labs, but then it's very difficult to recreate in a clinical setting. And we may get into that. But then finally, they end the article with program design, kind of how do you bring all this stuff together? And in table 4 and table 5, they provide 2 examples of some multiple phase programs for a football player, a soccer player, a midfielder with Achilles tendinopathy. And they kind of go through a phase of work capacity, a phase of strength, a phase of power and rate of force development, and then a phase of peak power, rate of force development. So it's kind of this hierarchy: create capacity, get strong, doesn't matter how slow you are, and then slowly start to increase the velocity of your movement and the rate at which you perform those movements. And then they did the same thing for a soccer player 6 months post-op ACL reconstruction. So that's kind of an overview of the article. And I like this article, and I like articles like this is because it makes things a bit digestible, because there's some real deep rabbit holes that you can get into when it comes to strength, rate of force development, motor unit recruitment, muscle activation, fiber types. Dear Lord, there's like 27 different fiber types now and subtypes of those fiber types. Like, you can really get into the weeds, but a paper like this kind of brings things surface level, and it makes it a little bit more digestible. And it also is a nice reference for you. So if you want to dig into reactive strength index, or if you want to dig more into rate of force development or strength training or testing, you can just pull the references, a lot of the references that were cited in this article, so it can act as a hub for you. And I really like articles like that. And real quick, Ryan D asks, is this an open chat? Yes, sir, it is. Feel free to use it. If you just have a real a question or a discussion point of real substance that you want to make sure we see and get, put it in the Q&A box, not in the chat box. But so that was a general overview of the paper. I liked the paper. We're going to talk about more details, but Kevin, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I share similar feelings. It really reminded me of the Sukamel paper that we talked about on eccentrics a few meetings back. I really appreciate articles like this, even though from like a level of evidence perspective, it's definitely not like top of the food chain. But I appreciate anytime we can see sort of transparency in sort of implementing some of these tools into rehabilitation. And I like the idea of kind of showing your work. And I think it establishes a really good framework to sort of, at the very least, help you develop principles to kind of start to really implement and address some of these things that we oftentimes maybe don't do the best job of in rehab.
Yeah, I agree. And I am going to try to share this. So can you see my screen? Can you hear me? Oh, okay, no. Can you see my face also?
Yeah, I got you on screen.
Oh, cool. So you see my face and the paper. Zoom's so cool. It's our first time using it. I think we'll stick with it. But so my discussion points, I want to go through some of this stuff because I did a talk at Combined Sections meeting, which is the big physical therapy conference in February. And I only talked for 25 minutes, but we had like a pseudo debate and Kevin he actually introduced us, so he was there. But Nicole Sertica took the side of explaining the rationale and the impetus behind low load blood flow restriction. And then I took the other side, taking the side of the case for heavy loading. And in reality, we just flipped a coin. So I could have very easily taken the low load blood flow restriction side. But, I had the side, just, load it heavy. And I thought that was going to be a really easy case to make, because it was like, I just have to define strength. And we know that high loads create more of a strength adaptation and maybe even more of a rate of force development and velocity adaptation than low loads. So this is going to be easy. But as I dug into the literature, I found that it wasn't very easy to define strength. And I like their simple definition here is can be defined by the upper limit of the neuromuscular system to produce force. But the question is, what are you measuring? How are you measuring force? Because that changes whether you're going to see changes in strength. The way that you measure a construct changes the definition of that construct potentially. And so as I was looking in the literature, I was finding that in those groups that used like the back squat, for example, to define strength and measure strength, heavy loads seem to win out a little bit more consistently than light loads. But when they were testing isometric, just maximal force development isometrically, it was different. You didn't see as much of a difference between high load and low load. And I thought that was curious, but what it said to me was, oh, wow, it's a different thing that you're measuring. So force production, we can kind of say is this universal, or strength may be a proxy for force production, but that can be measured and trained in a myriad of ways. And, they talk about the back squat being the ability to squat double body weight is kind of the number so that you can maximize any rate of force and plyometric training you do from on out. And if you don't have a 1.6 times body weight back squat, then you might as well not worry about anything else but just getting strong. And I think those are nice heuristics or rules of thumb. But what is a back squat testing when we really get down to the brass tacks? The back squat is testing your ability to back squat. It's testing your ability to overcome load in a very specific coordinated pattern. So it's up to you as a coach and a clinician to worry about whether that pattern matters. Does a back squat matter? Is that a proxy for what you actually care about? Now, if you're a powerlifter, of course it is. If you're a weightlifter, it's less so because you don't compete in the back squat. But if you're but it's still relevant. But if you're a soccer player, basketball, football, now you have to ask yourself, okay, is a back squat testing the quality of strength that they're going to have to then express on the field? And it may be yes, but that's, just thinking about the construct of strength is not that easy, I guess was my point here. You have any thoughts on that? And we got some questions thrown in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the difficult thing, right? Because ultimately strength is going to be specific to the task, kind of like you said, even getting down into things like joint angles and muscle groups that are utilized. So I thought putting forth this idea that the trend that was kind of emerging to me throughout this paper was that to get max benefit from any sort of power ballistic type training, they need to have a sufficient base of absolute strength, which I think I would agree with. But the problem becomes, what's this idea of the distinction between strength and the ability to generate force, or how strong is sort of strong enough before we can start to implement some of these things. And I think it gets difficult, especially if we move beyond something like, post-op rehabilitation or something, is kind of figuring out what is that rate limiter for this person. Because that was kind of the biggest thing that jumped out to me, was this idea of sort of like force velocity profiling. And that would essentially allow you to become more systematic, or maybe operate in more of a best practice manner from program design. But it always comes back to this, getting hung up on these definitions. And I think that's the most difficult thing. It seemed arbitrary to me to just say that 1.6 times body weight. I know they reference sort of 2 articles in there, but I don't know, for me clinically, that I would necessarily use that as my primary driver to make those decisions.
And I think that's going to be a conversation we get into with programming too, because it's hard when you're writing a paper like this. It's very difficult to dig into the nuance, because these authors, like, I've listened to them on podcasts, I've read a lot of their stuff, and they understand nuance, and they understand a dynamical system and a complex adaptive system. But first of all, if you're going to get your stuff published in a peer-reviewed journal, you're going to be limited on the amount of characters that you can use. So like, that's a constraint on the paper. But if you look at the tables and the programs, it's very deterministic, and it's very phase potentiated, meaning this phase develops this quality, which will tie into this quality, which is just stack on stack on stack. And on paper, that makes total sense, but it doesn't always play out that way. And then you ask yourself, well, am I not allowed to do this thing yet? And then when am I allowed to do this? Because they just say phases. They don't give you a time frame or anything like that.
I mean, even something like Vermeil's hierarchy, which I love in terms of like organizing thoughts and creating a framework. Like you said, it's that very sort of like stepwise process that doesn't allow. And I think that's just the limitation of models in general.
Yeah,
It doesn't express the kind of the fluidity between phases, or like where the rate limiter here, it's going to change throughout the rehabilitation process.
Right. So if I'm just scrolling down and you can still, do you just see the PDF right now? You're muted.
I got the paper in front of me, and then both of us are up on the side.
Oh, okay, cool. So if I just scroll down to table 1, these are examples of different resistance training prescriptions to enhance strength. They're just, just general guidelines. And also Laura and David, I see your questions and they're both good. I want to get to them live. But you'll see here, you've got different stages, but it doesn't tell you when you can move on. And it starts with isometrics and goes into isotonics. And then you've got some unilateral work and then some eccentric work that's heavier. So it's supra maximal there. And then you've got some, contrast methods. So these are these are effective, commonly used strategies in the gym. But just understand, this is just what they were like, yeah, this makes sense. There's not a ton of evidence behind French contrast training or accentuated eccentric training. So the point here is don't get too hung up. Like the overall picture of the progression, I think, is what you can take from it. But it doesn't have to be, you don't do this until you do this. So for example, in stage 1, you can be doing isometrics more frequently, maybe because they're irritable or their tissues are irritable and they can't really tolerate a lot of repetition and speed. But you can also still be doing trap bar deadlifts potentially, in the same program. So on Monday, I'm just making stuff up now, but say it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday type thing. Maybe you do isometric leg extensions all 3 days. You do a trap bar deadlift on Wednesday, and you do some type of split squat variation on Friday, and you do isotonics after your isometrics on Monday, something like that. But the idea then is that as they progress, as they become more tolerable to more work, then you start trimming down maybe the frequency and volume of the isometrics so that you have more room to do more of the other stuff. So then maybe you increase the frequency of one of these, and then eventually increase the frequency of maybe, over here. So now maybe you're trap bar deadlifting and doing back squats with the barbell or something like that. So these things can be layered, I guess is my point. You can be working on these things concurrently.
And, I mean, that's the beauty of like conjugate method or concurrent training, right? We're essentially training all qualities at one time. I think where stuff like this becomes more important is when you can identify what that rate limiter in the athlete is. And I think that's one of the hardest things, especially if you don't have access to, an isokinetic machine where you can look at rate of force development or force plates to kind of take a look at RSI or RSI mod.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest hurdle.
So Dia asks, can you please put the title of the article somewhere, please? So you should be able to see the article. And I also, if you check your confirmation emails, I linked the article, but I'll copy this right now. So that is a link to the PDF right now in the chat that I just sent. So you guys can click that and you can download the article and follow along. David asks, do you think that the starting strength, barbell logic, etc., defining strength as equal to force production is too simplistic? David, I think it's a great place to start. It just goes back to what we started the conversation with, is that force production, what does that mean? What are you using to determine force production? And so with starting strength, it's probably back squat, deadlift, which that's totally fine. But those movements are not necessarily all that as relevant to different sports as they would be to just a barbell athlete. So that's why we talk about isometric testing, because that is you're constraining the task to say, how much torque can this joint generate? I want to know this joint. With a squat, it's not that at all. It's a coordinated effort. So it's how much weight can I overcome in this coordinated effort? Now, in both scenarios, you're producing force, but the relevance of that number may be different depending on the sport. But I think it's a decent start. Strength equals force production. Then we can have a conversation from there.
Yeah, I think that even builds kind of into Laura's question, talking about whether or not measurements such as the back squat is a skill component, because there definitely is.
Yes.
And that's, like you said, that's the beauty of being able to strap somebody into, a biodex machine, because there's no real skill component to it. It's just have at it. Let's see how much force you can produce.
Exactly. So it's not one or the other, but that's why we do both. And Laura asked that, with a measurement such as the back squat versus isometric, is there not a skill component, not just force? Absolutely. I mean, if somebody's doing a back squat or a deadlift and they're standing on a force plate, you're going to get a force reading. But if, let's say in a back squat, in a high bar back squat, for example, let's say they don't have the coordination yet to be able to maintain the positions to overcome enough load, then their force production is going to be lower. But it's not because their legs weren't strong enough to stand the weight up. It was because they were doing something that just didn't take advantage of leverage. And then when they kind of learn the movement, all of a sudden they get stronger, very strong, much stronger, very quickly. But that was just because they used physics better, not necessarily because they changed the qualities of their neuromuscular system and from a physiology standpoint. And there's a difference there. So David, to your elaboration, weight on the bar, yeah, that's a proxy for force production, but it could be just that. Like you could be able to put more weight on the bar just because you've gotten better at the movement. Now, do you define that as strength? And I can't say that's wrong, because nobody has a great definition anyway. And then Adam says, either way, would you not say doing more of something will increase strength in that exercise? Does the performance, so any improvement in performance of anything is strength? If that's how you want to go with it, then that's fine. It just may, if you're calling everything strength, then nothing is strength. So you might have to get down, like we can say it's improving, like the weight, they're able to do more weight on the split squat, over the course of 3 or 4 weeks. But, beyond that, what does that mean? So if at the base level, if you want to define strength as just being able to move more weight, then I think it at least gets us starting to have the conversation. So Adam follows up, hence why strength is a skill, why you need to check how many times research tests this. Correct. So the last part of that, I'm not sure, but I agree that strength is a skill. Even strapping somebody up in a biodex and doing an isometric knee extension in the isokinetic dynamometer is still a skill of having to push as hard as you can. So there's a learning effect with that as well. Like you're not going to get a real high peak the first time somebody ever does a maximal isometric knee extension. There'll be a learning curve there, and there'll be kind of they'll take the e-brake off after a couple tests, and they'll really be able to go after it. So like that's a skill as well. But every time you add a degree of freedom, that skill becomes more complex. And the further removed you are from testing any one tissue or any one joint, and then it becomes more of a coordinated effort. So again, it's both things can be relevant.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of the isokinetic machines though is that you can kind of monitor for things like coefficients of variability and determining whether or not you're getting a good test. Generally, exactly. you'll throw out measures if you're seeing huge differences from trial 1 to trial 3, then you kind of know that there's still some learning aspect going on.
And so, yeah, I want to caution people from just making it too simplistic and saying, oh, if they're just doing more weight, there's a lot of factors that go into testing. And again, a test what the test, to quote Eric Mera, and A back squat is just testing that. And maybe they didn't go as low this time around. For some reason, like they cut their depth off 2 inches, but it wasn't all that perceptible as you're watching it, but that would make a big difference. Or they changed their stance, or they did something else. There's so many factors. So if we're not dealing with a power lifter and we're trying to use the back squat as a proxy for a sport specific task, there's just a lot of ways to manipulate that. It's also why hop testing has come under some scrutiny, because you can unload certain areas of your body and pass hop tests, but then have a very weak quad still. And we know that peak quad strength is an important determiner for re-injury in the ACL land. But those same people can pass hop tests because their bodies figure out a way to match the other side from a distance or like a height standpoint or something like that. So that's why we would then take that person and test a very specific thing, which is torque at the knee. And you literally constrain the system. You lock them down and you say, how much torque can this system generate right here? No other degrees of freedom. And then you also have hop tests, and you're probably also doing a heavy split squat test, maybe from side to side, or a back squat test, but it's all giving you information.
I like Josh's question here.
Okay.
So Josh is saying, where would the isometric mid-thigh pull fit into all of this? It seems to reproduce the complexity of the movement and measures force production isometrically, although it still reduces down to an arbitrary position, setup, etc.
Yeah. The isometric mid-thigh pull test is interesting. So if you guys are unfamiliar, if you're a weightlifter, you're probably really familiar, because the isometric mid-thigh pull test is essentially just your power position of your clean. So you're in a deadlift or a clean grip on the bar. And if you're in a lab, you're probably standing on a force plate with a barbell that's fixed into a rack. So this puppy ain't moving. And you just get on there, and the barbell is about, it's like mid-thigh, maybe a little higher than mid-thigh. But you get your hips underneath you, you get your torso relatively vertical, and you just pull on it. Isometric mid-thigh pull. So Josh, to your question, compared to a back squat or a deadlift, an isometric mid-thigh pull is a more reliable test for force production, because you constrain, first of all, it's isometric. So you can fix the range of motion exactly where you want it. And then you constrain the body to just produce force in this one position. That one position happens to be the most leveraged position of the body, and you can produce the most force in the isometric mid-thigh pull than in most other tests. I'm not sure how it compares to like the same body position, but the bar like pushing into an isometric rack. But I'm pretty sure the isometric mid-thigh pull is where a human can produce the most force, period. So to your question, it does reduce the complexity, it reduces the degrees of freedom, but then again, you have to ask yourself, does that matter? So for a weightlifter, there's a decent amount of correlation between isometric mid-thigh pull strength and 1 rep max snatch, 1 rep max clean, because that is the position that they finish the second pull in. For a field sport athlete, it shows force production, but how much force production matters for a soccer player. And that's how they get into the dynamic strength index in there, which is basically the force that you produce during a counter movement jump divided by the force that you produce during an isometric mid-thigh pull. And the idea behind that, and if I remember correctly, a dynamic strength index of less than 60%. So counter movement jump divided by isometric mid-thigh pull. If you have a small dynamic strength index, that means that your isometric mid-thigh pull force is larger compared to the force that you can produce in a counter movement jump. So it's speed and force. Well, the idea is that if you're under 60%, you want to do more dynamic stuff. If you're over 80%, which means that you're weak, you can produce 80% of the force during a counter movement jump. And they say, how do you measure force? They're standing on force plates. 80% of the force compared to what you can isometric mid-thigh pull, the idea is that you should get stronger because your isometric mid-thigh pull should be greater than just 20% more than your counter movement jump force production. So the quote unquote sweet spot is anywhere from 60 to 80%. There's not a lot of research on that though. And
I think it's so valuable though, because that at least gives you an idea of where you need to go from a programming perspective.
Yes. We were playing around with it. So obviously my clinic is closed, the gym is closed, but we were playing around with it. We don't have force plates yet. We will get them. But what we were using was the My Jump app. And that gives you a Newton's reading when you do a counter movement jump. So it gives you a force reading. And we were doing isometric mid-thigh pull with an inline dynamometer. Now, would I be able to publish a scientific paper on that? Hell no, because I'm using two different devices to measure force. And I've got a isometric mid-thigh pull station that's all rigged up, and but we were using that, and it was playing out. Like our lifters who have really strong squats, but that's from the eyeball test, are kind of slow. Their dynamic strength index was really small because they were super strong compared to their, I guess, reactive strength. And vice versa too. Our athletes that seem super springy, but would get buried in the bottom of a clean or would miss back squats, like, knees would cave in. They just kind of get wrecked by heavy weights. They had a dynamic strength index that was a little larger. So it was seeming to play out. I wish we could keep playing with it, but it's definitely interesting. Same with the dynamics or the reactive strength index that they talked about in this article too. So we're jumping all around now, and I realize that. Link, I'm going to get to your question in a bit because I'm going to actually defer that to Kevin because I don't have an isokinetic dynamometer. I don't have a Biodex. Kevin, do you have access to one?
Yeah.
Okay, good for you.
Do you want me to answer his question real quick?
Go ahead and answer it, and I'll just go through my notes here.
Yeah, so the way that you can kind of account for the individual differences there is once you determine whether you're going to test at 90 degrees or 60 degrees, it allows for adjustments within individual framework or pieces of the machine itself so that you can standardize the moment arm. So it doesn't matter as much as if you're dealing with somebody who's got a longer femur or a shorter femur. You basically configure the machine to them, and then it standardizes out across based off of the distance of the moment arm. And that's why you see things like Newton meters per kg, which is just, you have an objective measurement of force. You look at the moment arm that was utilized on the machine itself. And as long as you're keeping the angle of testing consistent, it normalizes out across.
Laura asks, so hopefully that answers your question, Link. Thanks for that, Kevin. I learned something. I don't have a lot of experience with isokinetic dynamometer. Laura asks, do you think rate of force development and reactive strength index, or RSI, relate at all to fiber type makeup of the athlete? The question being, is this something that is trainable beyond a small percentage? Quinn, thinking about your example of two lifters with different dynamic strength indexes. I think it's probably somewhat to do with fiber type. The fiber type conversation gets real murky for me real quick, because even when you're comparing type 2 and type 1, it's like, it's a foregone conclusion that type 1 muscle fibers aren't as strong or don't have the strength, the fiber, or the force capability. But it's more of they're smaller in general, and type 2 motor units are larger. So their absolute force production capabilities is greater, but when you get down to like per unit, it's not that different. Now, type 2 definitely have more potential for velocity. So, I could say like the bigger, slower, stronger athletes may be more type 1 dominant, but I'm so hesitant to say that because I have no idea. I think there is probably something to that in regards to how much fiber type can you actually change compared to changing somebody's counter movement jump height versus their like back squat, that's an answer that I don't have. I don't know if you can make somebody jump higher. Does that make their type 1 fibers go to type 2? And there is some potential for change. There definitely is. To what end, I don't know. So for me, it comes down to not measuring that anyway. So for me, it comes down to, okay, this athlete has potentially plateaued in their training. They're strong. And I'm going weightlifting life here. So if anybody wants to, field sport athlete examples, but they have a back squat that's 50 kilos more than their best clean, or maybe more, 80 kilos more than their best clean. We do a dynamic strength index. We find that the dynamic strength index is a small number. So they have a really strong isometric mid-thigh pull compared to a counter movement jump. And we also don't have any jumps in the program currently. We'll maybe take that information, say this athlete's plateaued, there's a huge gap between their absolute strength and their lifts, and they have a dynamic strength index that would call for more reactive strength stuff or jumps, like more of the speed on the speed strength continuum. Then we'll start to implement something like that. Maybe a loaded jump progression, some squat jumps first. And I like their table 2 and 3 progressions. They give you some examples, but then we would see if that changes their dynamic strength index over a period of time. But more importantly, does it help them bust through that plateau that they're experiencing in their actual training, which is ultimately what matters. Anthony, so he asked a good question. I'm curious to know the reasoning on why the article used leg extensions until failure. A new study by Sanchez Moreno 2020 talks about performing 25 to 50% of the possible reps you have in the tank and seeing very good strength improvements. Yeah, I mean, it all depends on the population that you're, like beginners will see gains with anything, doesn't matter. Training to failure is not necessary, but it is sufficient. So when you're doing a study and you want to just simply guarantee that we're going to elicit an adaptation, if you take them to failure, you've pretty much guaranteed that we're pushing a threshold that's going to elicit an adaptation. So the study that you cited, you can cite studies that did similar things that showed less of an effect. Like there's the further away you get from failure training, the less consistent. You'll see hypertrophy and you'll see strength gains, but sometimes it's equivocal. You'll see a study that shows in favor of leaving a lot in the tank, gaining strength hypertrophy, and you'll see a study that shows no, it's better to go closer to failure. But it also depends on if they're a beginner. So just don't get too hung up on a one-off study, but you can get strong a lot of different ways. Or if you can improve the performance of a movement over time a lot of different ways. They probably just said go to failure because that pretty much guarantees a stimulus.
Well, I think they were looking at strength endurance in that aspect too.
Right.
So.
Which there is evidence on that. Like more reps, going closer to failure will improve your ability to perform more work over a longer period of time, if that matters to you. I've got a ton of notes here. So honestly, don't know what the best place is to start, but I'm going to see if there's any more questions. Laura says, I guess less about fiber type specifically, more talking about athlete characteristics and or strengths. Well, yeah, I think that's what those tests, they provide you. So you don't really know why somebody is really strong, but is just not very springy. And you don't really know why somebody is springy, but not very strong. And I mean, from a physiology standpoint, like why are their tendons made differently? Are their muscles made differently? The answer is probably yes. There's genetic components. There's limb length changes your ability to produce torque, it changes moment arms. That matters. But something like a dynamic, since we are not measuring that stuff, or it's very hard to, something like a dynamic strength index at least gives you some type of proxy measure to see where's a place to start with this person. And then you implement a training program that's either more, speed, strength oriented or more strength speed oriented. You see if it changes the measure, and you see if it changes the outcomes that they really care about, like sport, some type of sport tasks. Okay. This is good. This is good stuff, guys. You know, power. Okay, so I wanted to touch on a couple things. Kevin, you said this in the beginning, and I think it's a point that can't be understated. When you read an article like this, you kind of gloss over the strength conversation, because we all kind of like assume that being strong is a good thing and that we're all kind of working on that. And then we look at the fancy stuff, which I consider rate of force development, rate of torque development, power, reactive strength, all of these things. And we say, oh shit, I'm not doing any of these things in the clinic. And like, let's go back to our real conversation here. This is about rehab, because that's what the article is about. And most of us are clinicians. And so you think about, oh man, I got to start looking at the reactive strength index. I got to start doing this and that. All my athletes need jumps, but that's not the case. And they actually cite, it's sprinkled in here in various forms, but getting strong and like producing just force in general, it doesn't matter if you have a high rate of force, if your peak isn't high enough to matter. You need a peak before you need rate, and rate can piggyback off of peak. So try to stay with me here, but force velocity profiling, I'm gonna overly simplify this, but if you can move a lightweight fast, you can move a really heavy weight slow. Let's assume you get it, like it's your true max effort. It's going to be slow, a really lightweight, or just your body weight is going to be fast. And then every intensity that you use is going to be kind of this sliding scale. So the heavier the load, the more force you'll have to produce, but the slower that you move. Duh, right? So the idea is that, oh, there must be this optimal middle. And you do see that. So if power is a function of force times velocity, there's somewhere, that's why weightlifters produce the most power, because weightlifters still have to lift relatively heavy and to produce high forces, but the weights are just light enough that they can still move fast. So weightlifters produce way more power than a power lifter, but a power lifter is producing crazy amounts of force and still high rates of force. It's just so heavy they can't move fast. But the idea is, oh, if I find that optimal middle, I can just train there, and that's all that matters. But that's not true either. You want the whole spectrum. So you're doing both sides concurrently. But just having a high peak, the ability to produce force will improve your ability to produce rate. And it doesn't necessarily work the other way around. So if you move heavy weights with the intent of moving quickly, even though you're not moving quickly because it's heavy, but the intent is to produce force as hard and fast as possible, you will improve your rate of force development with lighter loads and with heavier loads. So just keep that in mind. You could probably stick with that, like clinically. We're not seeing our patients all that long anyway. Don't forget about the basics of straight up force production. And if you cue them with the intent, like I'll say that explicitly, intent maximal. If I want them to go slow for whatever reason, I cue that too, 3 seconds up, 3 seconds down, whatever. But if I'm looking to get best bang for buck, force production plus rate of force development, I want a weight that's relatively heavy and I want the intent maximal, and you pretty much cover your bases in most scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it perfectly. If we're thinking about like a hierarchy of needs, you got to have maximum peak torque first. Then you can worry about rate. Then you can worry about power. And then you can worry about repeatability. But like you said, if you don't have peak, then it doesn't matter. You just fail more quickly.
Exactly. Now it's still like if you have peak, but you don't get to peak until 5 seconds down the line and the moment has passed. Okay, well, now we focus on rate, but peak matters first. Rate comes with.
100%.
Kyle he put down, he just recently saw a solid example by Eric Mara on this topic regarding the force velocity profiling for knee extension. I 100% agree. So a couple things. We just had Eric Mara on the podcast, Clinical Athlete Podcast. We haven't released it yet. It's going to be a 2-parter. A lot of this is relevant. He shows force velocity profiles in his knee course that he's got online. I just took it. It's awesome. I highly recommend Eric Mara's thesciencept.com, his knee extension course. I don't have any affiliation with that. I just, he's got great information, and it helps you to conceptualize these things in a more contextual manner. But if you don't take anything else away from this meeting, from this paper, don't forget the basics. High intent, high load, you're going to get most bang for your buck. Now, back to Anthony's question or kind of comment about a study showing leaving some in the tank and you can still get strong. I would also posit that low loads can still get you strong. And I'm more convinced of that after I did that BFR talk, trying to really make a case that heavy load, greater than 70 or 80% of 1 rep max, whatever, is the only way that you can produce strength. And it's not the case, especially if you're dealing with beginners. Because just the ability to coordinate your muscles and push into something like we've talked about as a skill, and doing light weights allows you to get a lot of repetitions by just kind of moving through. And I don't know why, but those groups often, even with lighter loads, increase whatever the measure of strength that was used. A lot of times just because they're learning how to actually use their muscles. And one thing this paper talked about is the advantage of heavy load will recruit the high threshold motor units. So those fast twitch muscles, those fast twitch motor units tend to have a higher threshold. So they don't fire unless they're needed. But if you move heavy loads, and especially if you move heavy loads quickly, it lowers the threshold of those motor units, and it kind of brings the type 2 fibers to the party a little earlier. And the thought is that light loads doesn't do that. But that's not necessarily true either if you exhaust all of the motor units in the pool. So Anthony, that's another maybe argument for failure training or close to failure is if you just fatigue out all the motor units, you're going to get to those type 2 fibers, even though you're not actually moving quickly or producing that much force. It's the fatigue element that gets them to activate. And that's the argument for blood flow restriction as well. But blood flow restriction, you don't need blood flow restriction. It's just that blood flow restriction fatigues the muscles even sooner. So you get to those high threshold motor units with a little bit less cost. It's like a coupon. You still buy the same thing, but you get it at a lower cost. Except BFR burns like a mofo. So it's not that low of a cost. It sucks. So my point being, you can get strength adaptations with lighter loads. In general, the body of evidence would say the heavier loads will yield more of a strength adaptation, and rate of force development, probably for sure. Like that's a skill that you need to practice if you really want to maximize it. But if your muscles just get bigger and you're able to express more force in some type of test, you're probably going to improve your rate somewhat along with it.
I don't think so.
Let's see here. Yeah, I don't know if we jumped around so much. I mean, this is a great conversation. Guys, I would look at the table 4 and 5 are kind of their summation programs. Like, oh, what does this all look like? And these are really good. These are good programs, but it's still the same conversation. Like, it doesn't have to be this very determined phase where you don't do one thing until you get to some arbitrary limit. So it's like in phase 1 here in table 4, well, how long do I work on work capacity for somebody with Achilles tendinopathy? When do I go to strength? Well, the answer is you can be working on those 2 phases concurrently. Maybe you're not yet doing unilateral drop jumps because they can't tolerate it. Some of this is just common sense. Like right now, their Achilles hurts doing any type of hopping. So we're probably not going to have some really like high impact hopping. And that's why we start with things like isometrics and slow isotonics, because it slows the rate, or it eliminates rate, but it keeps load into the tissues. And as soon as they can kind of tolerate those dosages, and maybe they do a week or two of doing some isometrics and some isotonics, and they've tolerated that without a setback in sensitivity, maybe you throw in a day of split squats, or you do a set of pogos, one set, see how they tolerate. You can start. So my point is, you can layer these things on.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big, I don't think there's never going to be like a clear like demarcation of like, now this person is ready to go into this. I just think that's why you need to just be careful with what you're prescribing, especially as we start to move more in towards like higher velocity stuff, right? Because we know tendons tend to be a little less tolerant of that sort of loading. But like you said, I don't think there's ever going to be a time where it's like, oh, well, we've been in this phase for 4 weeks, therefore they are ready for phase 2.
Well, I just wanted to make, and I agree. I wanted to make that point because if you look at table 4 and 5, you might get that idea. And so it can be confusing if you don't have a lot of experience programming this type of stuff. It's like in phase 2, all of a sudden I add 4 sets of drop jumps, 3 sets of pogos, and some really heavy split squats. No, so is this an entire month? I'm just each week I'm layering on like a ton more work. You've got to use some clinical judgment here and just like think about progression in general. So you don't want to spike somebody's workload, but maybe you add in a set of 1 or 2 of this group of exercises. So this entire phase here from phase 1 to phase 4 could be months. They say a 12-week period. So I guess, I'll eat my words a little bit there, but where you divide it up is not set in stone, and how you intermingle them is also, it's flexible. And Ryan, so that's what Ryan just asks. Is it possible that by trying to layer these things, you could slow down progress? No, I don't think so. I think it would be more sustainable progress, because I'm not saying slow the progress. I'm just saying, I'm saying chip away, I guess, because they don't really give a time frame of how long you stay in each phase. So we don't really know how long one is supposed to last. I'm going to assume that in a 12-week period, you have 4 phases. So you should spend equal time on each phase. It doesn't take that long to get used to isometrics, So I think these things are not going to be just these very deliberate equal blocks. And the same thing down here. I think I just had a quick note. Now that's just kind of my thought, Ryan. And I think if I ask, and honestly, I want to get this author group on the podcast, but I think if we ask them about the nuance of these programs, we'd have a lot more conversation about it than just kind of what the graphs show. I want to talk about isometrics. I like isometrics, and I use them pretty frequently. I use them to test, and I also use them to train. And I'm going to scroll up to table 2 here, where we say rate of force. And I hate that the table 2 is like that horizontal, but they've got explosive contractions here, because some people think rate of force development is like jumping. Well, no, that's kind of what they define as the reactive strength. But rate of force is just producing force really quickly from the onset. And it's actually really difficult to measure. So going back to Josh's question about the isometric mid-thigh pull, the reason rate of force development is really hard to measure reliably is because you have to determine a discrete starting point to know where this line starts to slope. So if somebody's standing on a force plate and they're like moving around and then they just pull really quick, well, it's going to be like, it's going to look like this and then a peak. You're going to have no ability to be able to like dissect where the start position was in order to measure the slope. So in an isometric mid-thigh pull, they have to stand completely still for at least a second. It's called the quiet phase. And then they pull as hard as they possibly can, which is not really what we do in sport. Usually we're like tensed up a little bit, but that's how you measure rate of force development. And with if you're doing it in a knee extension exercise, it's the same thing. You have to take all of the slack out of the system, and you have to make sure that if they are pushing, you got to chop that off. You got to chop that small amount of force that they're producing. You have to discard that. That's noise to get a true rate or a true slope. And that's why it's so difficult to actually measure rate of force development. It's fancy to talk about, but it's really, really hard to do, especially clinically. So, but you can train with the idea. So these isometrics here in example 4, explosive contractions, just small bursts. And the cue is as fast and hard as possible. So if you're doing an isometric, you get to pick the range of motion. So you can, if they're range of motion sensitive at any point, you can say, okay, well, we'll stay away from the sensitive range of motion for now, and we'll put you, somewhere in the middle. And now we have a day where we can just focus on force development, and they can actually kind of go ham on it when they can't really do that in other things yet, like the jumps or just isotonics, doing something for reps. They still have to kind of go slow and methodical, and we have to load it light because they're, still irritable to that movement. But if you find an isometric position that's relatively symptom free, it's an entry point to force production. It's an entry point to any loading, really. And we do stuff like this quite a bit with isometric knee extensions at different angles. We do isometric pulls at different angles for those experiencing a little bit of back pain. We'll do it single leg, and we do split squats, isometrics as well. We'll lock them in the rack and have them push up into a bar that's fixed, or we'll do isometric holds. So they'll just hold weights and kind of sit into a split squat and hold for maybe a longer period of time, but that's not rate of force. That's more of like just kind of positional endurance. But I just want to throw that out there. Isometrics are not just for analgesia, and they're not just the start, some type of throwaway thing that you don't need to do if you don't need to do it. I think they have, maybe it's that, but I think they have merit at different points, especially early in rehab. But we learned that in PT school, but I think we just kind of like, isometrics. Yeah, you start with isometrics, but you can make isometrics hard. Like in example 4, explosive contraction, 10-second contraction as hard and fast as possible, 4 sets. Go ahead and try to do that and tell me that's not hard. Or 3-second contractions, kicking into a pad as hard as you can for 3 seconds, let off for 3 to 5 seconds. Do it again. Do that 5 times, rest for a minute, repeat that 3 or 4 times. That's work. So, just don't forget about that as a way to get people into the loading game. Kevin, you got anything to add to this one? Ooh.
I think we got a question in there.
Madison. Yeah.
Yeah.
You saw it. Thinking George Davies may have some good resources regarding objective measures, isokinetics and or isometrics to help determine when progression between stages may be appropriate beyond tolerance and or subjective reports, particularly when trying to introduce fundamental acceleration and deceleration based exercises, not just the typical plyo guidelines.
Yeah, I know. He's kind of like the godfather of a lot of this stuff. So he's got some great algorithms out there just in regards to return to play testing.
Yeah. So if anybody's looking for some further resources at George Davies, appreciate you bringing that up, Madison. DAVIES, George Davies algorithm, George Davies protocol. It's funny because he's talking about, it's the pendulum swinging back to some of that stuff. It was there in the 90s, and then it swung to the functional craze where nothing in isolation matters, and that's all garbage, and just squat, just do the functional tests. And now hopefully it's starting to swing back to the middle where we acknowledge that it all kind of matters, and you just have to determine why you're doing something.
Just ride the fence forever and you'll never be wrong.
It's true. Except the pendulum always hits you every time it swings if you stay in the middle.
It's true.
Okay, this was a great meeting, guys. Hopefully you got something out of it. if nothing else, it's a way to spark your interest into something more. I would read the article again, and I would start pulling some of these references if you want to dig into any particular topic deeper. I appreciate all the discussion. Little tip, Ryan, absolutely no problem. If you are looking, like, if you want to search these articles or these authors, I mentioned that I like all of them, and you're like, well, I want to know more of their work. What you can do is you can follow them on Google Scholar or ResearchGate or PubMed, and you'll get an email notification every time they publish a new study. So I found this article because I'm subscribed to a couple of the guys on the author list, and it pinged right to me. So just keep that in mind. If you find an author who continually puts out information that you're interested in, you can follow them not just on social media, but also on their ResearchGate and Google Scholar pages. If you're interested in the forum, Shelby, no problem. I'm glad it was helpful. Use that forum link that I put in the chat, and the upcoming podcast, Eric Mara's podcast, is going to be coming up. We've got the Adaptable Business series coming up. We've done one with Frank Benedetto for everybody who's been affected by this, especially those small business owners like me. The Adaptable Business series is free. It's like this. It's a live webinar discussion roundtable where we have a guest come on and we take questions from the community about creating agile solutions in the short term that will also carry us through the uncertainty, hopefully in the long term. What else are we doing, Kevin? Oh, we got Jared Maynard's Pain Science course is free right now. We've had over 1,500 people enroll in the last 3 days, which is pretty cool. So if you go to the Clinical Athlete Instagram, go to our link and profile, and you can take Jared Maynard's Pain Science course for free. The code is the word community. So just click the link in profile, go to the Academy, Clinical Athlete Academy, go to his course, and you get that completely free. It's approved for CEUs through the Board of Certification for Athletic Trainers, and it's also approved through the FSBPT, the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy Pro Cert program, which covers like 30 plus states. So, and if you're not a PT or athletic trainer, you can usually claim those courses retroactively and just send it in to your governing body and see if they accept it. People do that all the time. Madison had another one. She says, for anyone that's interested in looking at isometrics, try researching Alex Natera. Great resource. I agree. Dustin Aranchuk has an isometrics review article that came out at the end of 2018, beginning 2019. That's phenomenal. I refer to that constantly. We're actually going to have him on the podcast too. But just Google Dustin Aranchuk isometrics, and his research article review should come up. And it's basically just, what are isometrics good for? All the ways that you can train it. It's a research review. And Alex Natera, follow him, his website on Instagram. You can see how somebody implements these things into practice. So you get kind of both.
Yeah, the Aranchuk article is great. It's like a little mini textbook almost.
Just my favorite. Yep. Okay, Kevin, thanks so much, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody, I hope this was good. We're going to do more, of course. Chris, no problem. Glad it was helpful. And we'll talk soon. Thanks, everyone.